of my favourite subgenres of subgenres is haunted asylum movies. So I was thrilled to watch the German found footage movie HEILSTÄTTen. At least that's how I think you pronounce it. It is known as Sanctuary here in the UK, Haunted Hospital in America, and Fear Challenge in yet other territories. But it is a German language movie, so be prepared to read subtitles. It is directed and co-written by Michael David Pate. And the interesting thing here, it actually has a YouTube element. So the story focuses on these kind of rival YouTube channels. As there's a kind of like a prankster styles channel, and they do the various kind of silly pranks that you would have seen on other kind of real YouTube channels. And they challenge this like beauty vlogger to stay in this kind of like this haunted, you know, it's like a sanatorium for tuberculosis or something, I think it was, in what kind of World War II. And they kind of challenge these kind of two rival kind of YouTubers, and they end up kind of going to this abandoned kind of sanatorium, sort of abandoned hospital type thing. And they are joined actually by a couple of other people, including a third YouTuber who is very kind of like a relatively small YouTuber in comparison. So they kind of obviously are trying to kind of outdo each other, trying to scare each other, etc. Ultimately try and win the challenge, so to speak, and you know, whoever's going to kind of like bolt will obviously lose. And as you kind of probably would expect, things don't go quite according to plan, and there may be other forces at work here that have malicious intent towards our hapless YouTubers. So let's discuss this movie. I won't go through all the titles again. So I actually quite enjoyed this one. I actually thought this was a somewhat well-made film, and the YouTube angle does give it a somewhat plausible twist in regards to some of the kind of the tropes that you may not have seen. So let me just go through some of this. Just these little touches that I liked. One of the things I enjoyed, one of the questions you have to ask in kind of modern horror films is why won't you call out for help? And they kind of come up with quite a neat conceit in this movie, is that the person who is kind of letting them into this hotel, this hospital, who works there, doesn't want them kind of like live vlogging or tweeting on the internet until they are done, and so as such he kind of bans their phones because he doesn't want to risk him losing his job by letting him in this abandoned hotel. And I actually thought that was quite neat, that quite a good idea. And the same thing, they park the cars very kind of far away because obviously again they don't want to be sort of spotted. So there's a kind of like a kind of neat reason, I feel, and a plausible reason for obviously kind of these, you know, calling for help, for example, is not on the table. In addition to that, you also have the conceit here where obviously the different kind of YouTubers think the other one is kind of pranking them when stuff kind of starts to go awry. I'm not quite believing it. I think they are, because they've done the same thing. They've tried to kind of like scare the other one out, so to speak, to kind of win the challenge. So they just assume obviously things are kind of like you know, plants and stuff to try and win the challenge, so to speak. So again, it adds that kind of this element here of, you know, the protagonist in this movie, do they kind of believe, you know, what's kind of going on or not? And I got to say, they actually captured the kind of the YouTube style personalities quite well. We have these kind of very kind of abrasive and kind of loud couple of lads who are the kind of the pranksters, so to speak, and they're quite obnoxious to a certain degree, but they're actually kind of very much like the real kind of like prankster kind of videos that you will see on a kind of YouTube. And it's kind of like this beauty vlogger is somewhat kind of self-absorbed. And again, it's all kind of quite realistic setup, and kind of I feel has a kind of it's very current in kind of today's climate. So I thought it was all very good. When we go into this kind of like this sanctuary and stuff, you know, it looks really cool. I mean, I don't know if it was filmed in a kind of a real hospital. I think it might have been actually, but it looks absolutely fantastic and genuinely dangerous, because when you see these kind of these dilapidated stairways and things like this and kind of holes in them, I think, Christ, someone could genuinely hurt themselves wandering around in the dark, and inevitably in the movie that's exactly what happens. So yeah, the location was good. There's some fairly kind of good kind of like scares here in this movie. Lots of jump scares, as you could probably expect with this kind of film. And I've got to say, I sometimes find it hard to judge acting on a kind of a foreign language, because obviously I'm reading the kind of the subtitles, and sometimes the translation isn't exact, and it's hard to sort of see the performance if they're emoting in a certain way when you're reading, you know, a translation, so to speak. But I actually got to say, I thought the acting here was very good by the cast, from obviously from what I can tell. And there was actually an attempt here to have a little bit of a twist on the genre to make it somewhat different to maybe a lot of the kind of these haunted asylum sort of style movies, and kind of maybe having a different direction. And we'll come on to that. But I applaud the attempt to have to try and pull the rug out from under you to a certain degree. I actually think the movie's quite well shot, in a way a little bit too well shot in actual fact. I mean, there are certain camera angles and kind of like establishing shots and things like this that is kind of filmed in sequence. You think, well, that's clearly not, as you know, obviously found footage, because they wouldn't simply be able to get that shot. So it does kind of like kind of break the kind of the illusion somewhat in regards to the kind of the found footage genre, and things like, you know, kind of like musical kind of scores and things like that, and kind of like just the odd kind of like rousing kind of musical effects and things like that. Kind of, again, just shatter the illusion a little bit of a found footage movie. But the real issue here for me is when it kind of has this twist probably about 3/4 of the way through the movie. To me, although I appreciate the attempt, and in a way it's clever, I will say that, but to me it just lost credibility, because if we were led to believe in this universe what had actually happened, I thought, come on. I mean, that's just a little bit silly. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but to me it just didn't seem plausible about what actually happens. And then it kind of doubles down with the very ending, the climax of this movie. The fate of one of our antagonists is, I just thought, well, I don't really get why that has happened. It just seems that something happens out of nowhere, and I didn't really get why that was supposed to happen. So unfortunately, the ending for this movie was let down a little bit. Now I did appreciate the attempt of doing something a little different, but I don't feel it particularly worked. You know, I think, without kind of spoiling anything, when you kind of watch this movie as a whole, you start to question things and thinking, well, hang on, it doesn't quite make sense, and you know, you'll pick holes at it. But overall, I think this is actually a pretty good entry into the kind of the haunted genre of, you know, haunted hospital found footage movies, what I actually quite like, and very kind of small genre here, only kind of like 20 or 30 or so films in this genre, but I really enjoyed this one. And there are a couple of, you know, fairly cheap jump scares, admittedly. But overall, I've got to say, I thought this was one of the better movies for this kind of this type of thing. So I'm actually going to give this one a 7 out of 10. I actually kind of liked it. So there you go. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment, and I shall look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.